Welcome back everybody, Addison with S4 Suspension here, and you just got a brand new shock or your suspension freshly serviced from us at S4. Well, today I'm going to show you how to reinstall your fork and your shock back on your bike. Before getting started, there's a few key things that you'll want to note. If this is a new shock for your bike, you want to confirm that you have the correct size, the length, the stroke, and that this shock is compatible with your bike. Most of that you can do through your manufacturer's website. Before removing your old shock, you'll want to note any flip chip orientations or position altering linkages. You will also want to note the orientation of your current shock, piggyback, static versus moving eyelets, your air valve assembly, etc. You'll double check once the shock is actually mounted in the bike, but now's a great opportunity to see if your shock fits in your bike without potentially causing any damage as it goes through its travel. Also, check with your manufacturer if you're upgrading to a coil to make sure that your bike is compatible with those. Not all bikes are compatible with coils. Now with those few key notes in mind, let's talk about what kind of tools we're going to need for today's job. We'll start, you're going to need some blue Loctite and some grease, which I'll explain where and when those go in. You're going to need various Allen keys to install your bolts. You're going to need a valve core remover, a torque wrench, and whatever tool you need to reinstall your top cap. I need this fancy cassette tool. Oh, and always, oh man, can't forget a shock pump because we're working on suspension. By now, you've probably already removed your old suspension, whether it's for replacing or servicing. But if you need help with that, we have a video in our tech help section all about removing suspension. While you're there, check out our installing mounting hardware video as well, because you'll probably need mounting hardware for your new shock. One thing we're going to do before we get started is clean all of this linkage. So let's do that now. We'll get rid of some of these tools. And it's a great opportunity while your shock is out and you have free movement over your linkage to go inside and clean underneath in all the really hard to get spaces that you typically just can't reach because your shock is in the way. While you're here, take the opportunity to move your linkage through its travel. See if any of the bearings feel rough. Give it a jiggle side to side to see if anything feels loose. Things that you just can't do while the shock are on the bike because it makes the system too rigid. Okay, time to assemble. Let's grab that shock. If your frame has mounting spacers that go between the shock and the mounting location, use a small dab of grease on the mounting surface. Then you're actually able to stick your spacer on there and it will hold it in place. If you have any flip chips, before reinstalling, make sure they're clean, and then a light layer of grease will go a long ways in preventing clicks and creaks and pops. We'll reinstall the flip chip in the orientation they need to be. After reinstalling your flip chips, it's a great idea to put a light layer of grease around the shaft of this bolt. If your threads are on your bolt, don't put grease on your threads. That's for blue Loctite, and I'll show you how to do that momentarily. With your mounting spacers and your flip chips in place, you'll slide your shock into the frame. Then take your greased mounting bolt, push it through. Sometimes it takes a little bit of wiggling. There we go. A quick note here, I recommend mounting the moving side of the shock, so the side of the shock that mounts directly to the rear triangle, mount that first. That allows you to control the rear triangle and the shock all with one hand when you go to mount this forward or static mounting bolt. Slide the bolt in and start to tighten it. Now it's time for Loctite. We're going to install the mounting bolt into the frame. Then we're going to put blue Loctite on the female threads of the mounting location. The reason you want to do that is because if you put Loctite on the thread before pushing the bolt through, you risk potential of pushing blue Loctite into your bearings or your mounting hardware. And that's not where it belongs, and that's just going to cause problems and inefficiency down the road. Loctite is in. We'll get our bolts hand tight first with our Allen key. Snug them down. Then it's time for the torque wrench. We'll set our torque wrench to our manufacturer recommended settings. For most bikes, you'll be able to find your torque specs on your manufacturer's site. Boom, shock is in. That wasn't too difficult, but before we move forward to the fork, let's confirm that this shock is not going to smack into anything on the frame. We can do that simply by removing the valve core. Once your valve core is out, it will allow you to cycle your shock throughout the entire stroke. You'll do this to confirm that your shock is not going to bind or crash or smash into your frame in any way. This is especially crucial if you're installing a new shock on your bike. Okay, let's air it up and we'll get ready to set sag a little bit later. But we're going to move on to the fork for now. Typically you won't need to add too many special tools for this. For me, I need to add a cassette lock ring tool because that's how my top cap is installed, because I have a multi-tool. If this is a new fork or a new to you fork, you need to confirm the length of the steer tube. If you need help cutting your steer tube, we have a video in our tech help section all about that. But no matter what, you're always going to need to confirm that your fork has a crown race on it. Your crown race is this lower part attached to the fork that the bearing actually sits on. Once you confirm that your steer tube is the right length and your crown race is installed, take a moment to clean everything up. Remove your bearings from your frame, clean the races, clean the bearings, make sure everything is nice and tidy before we start to put it back together. Now that everything's nice and clean, we'll go ahead and take the opportunity to put some new waterproof grease in our bearing races. We'll reinstall our upper bearing into the race, followed by our compression ring. We'll add a light layer of grease around our crown race, followed by our lower bearing assembly. When you're finally ready to install your fork, you want to have your dust cap and your spacers easily available. Your pinky makes a great holder. Now slide your steer tube up through the head tube of your bike, push your compression ring all the way down, followed by your dust cap, your corresponding spacers, and finally, your stem. Once you have your stem in place, snug it down with your Allen key, just finger tight. Now that your stem is holding your fork, you can take the opportunity to install your top cap. You can loosen your stem pinch bolt, snug down your top cap, then confirm that your stem and your fork are straight, and then just snug up those pinch bolts. All right, we're gonna take this opportunity to put on all of our small parts. That's our fender, that's our brake, any brake mounting hardware that's associated with it, our cable guide, all of those small parts before we put our wheel back on. Once we put our wheel back on, it's time to put it on the ground and adjust that headset. When installing your front brake caliper, leave the bolts loose so when you go to put your wheel in, the caliper can align with your disc rotor. Okay, all of our small parts are now reinstalled on our fork. We'll follow that up by throwing the wheels back on the bike so we can adjust our brake caliper and our headset. While we're here and we have our torque wrench out, we'll go ahead and torque our axles down. An easy and simple way to align your caliper and your rotor is just to simply grab your front brake, pull the lever closed while you torque down your brake mounts. To check for rotor alignment, simply spin your front wheel and listen for rub between the caliper and the rotor. And then visually look down from the top and see if you can see them running into each other. If you can't and you're satisfied, we can go ahead and take the bike out of the stand and begin to adjust our headset. We'll mount over the top of the bike, loosen our pinch bolts on our stem, use whatever tool you need to tighten down your top cap, get it snug just to the point where it stops and is snug, align your front wheel and your stem. If you're cross-eyed like me, it could take a few times. And then re-snug down your pinch bolts on your stem. Hold your front brake and push your bike back and forth. See if you feel any play in the headset. You can do this by holding onto your dust cap here on the top, then turn your bars sideways and do the same motion. If there's no movement or play in your headset, then you're good to go and you re-torque down your stem. If it is still loose and there is some movement, loosen your pinch bolts, tighten it just a little bit more. But don't exceed your factory recommended torque specs. That's very important because that can cause problems on your bearing and cause premature wear, and you don't want to do that. But once everything is tight and snug and you're happy with the results, torque everything back down to those factory recommended torque specs, and we'll continue on. Alternate between the upper and the lower bolts, tightening each bolt just a little bit at a time until you reach spec. And just like that, you successfully reinstalled your fork and your shock back on your bike, as well as added a vital tool to your tool chest. As always with new or freshly serviced suspension, it's a great idea to take the opportunity to reset your sag. We have a video on our site on just how to do that. As for now, it's time for me to get back in the shop to continue to make your ride smoother.